Brachale. Okay, I hope my voice holds out. My throat is bothering me a little bit. Good. Okay, so let's get started. If people had a chance to see that video of the performance? Some people wrote to me and asked me for a copy. I cannot tell you how powerful it was to be there. You really can't tell at all from the video that we did, but it was incredibly powerful. The woman who played the sixth beggar, Sarah Halpern, she's a very special woman, and she had lost her husband not too long before then, so she definitely knew all about pulling out the chitzim. I sent, for those who had asked me, I sent a link to the, let me see if I can turn up the voice a little bit. My voice might be faint also just because my throat is bothering me a little bit. Please daven for me because I have to do a singing event this week and I'm hoping that I'll be loud and clear. Okay. So, too low? It's okay. Give me some feedback, please. Let me know. Yes? No? Maybe so? Do I need to adjust the mic? It could just be that my voice is weak, but tell me how it's coming out through the sound. Can you hear me clipping my teeth? All right, if somebody needs it adjusted, I will make an effort. Just let me know. A little louder. Okay. Let's see. Sometimes I'm afraid of the too much gain on the mic, but you'll let me know. Okay, hopefully it'll be clear. Won't bother anybody. All right, so so I was saying that for those who had seen the video, the woman who played the sixth beggar is a good friend of ours, an old friend, and she had lost her husband not that long before. And in addition, if you the young girl who was playing the princess, and she was singing that song, which is from Tehillim Kufman Bet, Tfilah B'Me'ara. She had also written that song. That melody was something that she had composed, and that's also a Saran, that's Sarah Porat. And she had, now she's not Porat anymore, but in any case, she was Porat then. And she had, she had lost her mother young, and she's a very, very talented singer and composer. And so it's very hard to describe how in a community, how deeply we felt their roles, not just because they were playing roles, and they were not really playing roles, but the figures that they were embodying touched us profoundly because, these are not performers, but women of our own community and with whom we all have very strong connections. So, and also knew what they had been through. And so it was all the more meaningful for that. Now, let's get back to our TIKKUN HAKLALI. I hope that people have been, now that you have your Tet Zayin, your chapter 16, so, hopefully more clear. Now we can move on to 32. And I don't know if I told this story the week before last, but I want to tell it because it's very important. A lot of people, I won't say a lot of people, but I was once at a Breslov event where someone who's quite knowledgeable and sort of has a leadership role, I wouldn't say sort of, actually does have a leadership role within the Breslov community, when asked by the women who had gone to this event whether it was beneficial for them to say TIKKUN HAKLALI every day, he sort of dismissed it and said, well, it's not really such an important thing for women. And I took issue with that. I'm sorry, my throat is also bothering me, so I don't want to. I'll see if I can adjust the mic a little bit more, but I'm not feeling that great, unfortunately. I have a bit of a cold. I think that's as far as I can go. So I'll try my best to speak up. Now, sorry. So I took issue with that a little bit. Did I tell this story in the first week? I don't remember. Anyway, I took a little bit of an issue with that because it's very clear from Rabbi Nachman's writings and also from the context of the sixth beggar that we're not just talking about a tikkun mikra laila like we started off speaking about, that it's specifically something to do with men, but it's a general remedy that's very important for everybody. So I didn't really understand why he had discouraged her. In addition, in the Yerushalayim Breslov community that I kind of entered into when I got married, and I had the great merit of having a close relationship with women who were raised in the homes of Breslov leaders from the last generation. Chai Rosenfeld comes to mind especially because we had a family connection with her, have a family connection with her. She actually brought me to Uman the first time. And she made very clear that it was always the path among Breslov Hasidim that the women did say Tikkun HaKlali every day, or they made an effort to. So I was a little bit frustrated with the fact that it was dismissed. And then I'll tell you a story, even though we're not yet to chapter 32, but we'll get there, Bezrat Hashem. I just want to tell you this. A couple of years back, I took a group of ladies to Uman, and one of the women who came on the trip came not because she's a Breslover, but because she heard about me and she had come to some classes, and she knew that she was a direct descendant of Rabbi Nachman through one of his daughters. Everybody is through one of the daughters. One of his daughters had made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, and of her descendants, her great-grandmother or something like this they had like a whole, they had very clear lineage. It wasn't something that was in any doubt whatsoever. They were from the family line. So she was very curious and wanted to come to Uman, even though they're not a Breslov family, because she knew she had a family connection. Now, around that time, they had done in the Great Synagogue in Yerushalayim, I think it was in the Great Synagogue and not in the museum, they had done an exhibit of artifacts from the early days of Chassidut. And anybody who had family artifacts, they were was asked that they participate and give in things. And she had some artifacts that were relevant to the history of Chassidut, that were family artifacts, and so on. She had told me about this exhibit. I'm pretty sure it was in the Great Synagogue. This is going back a few years. I didn't tell this story, did I? Could somebody give me a heads up? I didn't tell this the first week, did I? Please, give me a heads up, somebody. I don't think I did. So anyway, so she came on our trip, lovely woman, and when I take a group to Uman, so every group I give them out a copy of Tikkun HaKlali because obviously we're going to go to Rabbi Nachman, we're going to go to other places. We want to be able to. Everyone should have their own Tikkun HaKlali wherever we go. So I get copies for everybody. I bring them along and I give them out. Now on Shabbos, we're at the Shabbos meal, and everybody gets a chance if they want to get up and share a story or a Dvar Torah or something like that. So she got up and she said, I really want to share something with you. When my great-grandmother passed away, so she lived in Tzfat, and I went to go clean out her apartment. When I cleaned out her apartment, one of the things that I received from her estate was her copy of Tehillim. And it was very interesting because her Tehillim was so beautiful. It was so, it had been like obviously soaked in tears, and it was very precious to her. And she was always saying her Tehillim. So it was, it's a really beautiful memento of I think it was the grandmother or the great-grandmother, I couldn't remember. In any case, but she said there was something that was very perplexing about it. When we opened it, we saw that she had, aside from all the names and, little ptakim, little tzetlach notes with names to pray for, that she had stuck into various points in the Tehillim, she had a note in it. I don't even think it was a note. I think she had marked it in the cover. She had marked in Tet Zayin Lamed Bet Mem Aleph Mem Bet Nun Tet Ayin Zayin. Those are the numbers. We know those are the numbers of the chapters of Tikkun HaKlali. Now, she said, we didn't know what it was. So we just thought that these were 10 chapters that were especially near and dear to her. And we just left it at that. And she said, here, you've given me this Tikkun HaKlali. I've never seen a Tikkun HaKlali before. And now I see that these are her 10 chapters. So when I got home, I was very excited about this because what it tells us is that in the family line, even among people who did not, her grandmother or the great-grandmother was already not a Breslover chassid per se. She had married into a different chassidut. But clearly it stayed a tradition among the women of the family that they would say Tikkun HaKlali. So, because it was written into her Tehillim, which was her personal Tehillim. So I just wanted to share that with you. In case anybody ever asks you whether this is really relevant to women, you can share a very beautiful story. I was so moved when she told it to us. I was so astounded that I got to have the opportunity to kind of like link her back up with her family tradition of Tikkun HaKlali, which she didn't even know was hers. Okay, now we move on. Heike, were you there that trip? I don't remember. It was Orna. Okay, let's go on. So we have to jump into our parak. Now, let's see. So let's first, remember we said that some of these chapters, Rabbi Nachman gave hints about what is the nature of their spiritual remedy. We only really have 4 that he was very specific about, and the others are just by hints. So that are other by hints that we pick up from other places. So what we're going to do is look to see now what he has to say specifically about this one. And this is an excerpt from lesson 205 of Likutei Moharan. Now this is one of the lessons where he goes specifically through the 10 chapters and describes what they are. And he also talks a little bit more about the Kabbalistic meaning of doing these 10 chapters, but I'm going to leave that alone. And now I'm going to talk about this second one. Remember, Tet Zayin, he told us, is related to the spiritual song of Bracha. Even though it doesn't start off, it's Michtam David, nevertheless there's a Avarechet Hashem Asher Ya'asani, right? That's what we learned last week, that the spiritual song of Bracha, and what a Bracha it is, what a blessing it is, when we have the Eitzah, when God provides for us, from within us and also from outside of us, the direction that we require in order to come close to Him. That's called the ultimate bracha. So that's our bracha chapter, and that we already did in Tet Zayin. That was 16. Now we move on. Now this one is called Ashrei. This is a pretty good hint because the first line of the actual Tehillim is Ashrei. Starts off Ashrei. Now even though the chapter itself starts off with David Maskil, and I'll explain what that means in a second. That's kind of a heading, but that does not tell us what the spiritual song is that animates the chapter. Remember I said that sometimes it can be confusing because we would say a maskil sounds like a type of song, just like michtam is a type of song. That's true. But in terms of the remedial and therapeutic effects on the soul, it is not aligned with the nature of this chapter. The nature of this chapter is Ashrei. What does Rabbi Nachman have to say about the concept of the Ashrei? Which means this is true for all of the chapters of Tehillim that don't think about whether they start with the word Ashrei or if they have the word Ashrei in them, because we don't always know which chapter is associated or expresses each of those 10 types of songs. Remember, if it was that easy, then over the last 3,000 years, another sage might have come up with a good, the correct spectrum of 10. So it's not quite as simple as it is. It's not just based on picking out the words that seem to be aligned, because there are many, many choices and many hints. And so here, what is the quality of Ashrei that is being expressed? Ki Ashrei hu l'shon re'iyah v'histaklut. When we say Ashrei, normally we translate it as fortunate, Ashrei ha'ish, and so on. Nevertheless, or hey, Ashrei nisui pesha kasui chatzah. That's our first verse. We will look at it inside. But we have Ashrei has many other meanings to it. If you were going to think about what is the shoresh, what is the root of this word, we can see several shorashim in it. Ashrei is, in terms of its pshat, its straightforward meaning, we normally would translate it as having something to do with osher, with an aleph, which means happiness, right? So that's why we say Ashrei, happy is the man, or fortunate is the man. Fortunate is kind of a double language because osher with an aleph sounds the same as osher with an ayin. And even though they are not the same words, nevertheless, when we have two words in Hebrew that sound exactly the same, even when they're not written exactly the same, we know that they have deep conceptual relationships between them. And so our osher and our osher, our happiness, right, and our good fortune or wealth, because osher with an ayin really means wealth, we understand that osher with an aleph is expressing the kind of joy that one feels when one feels like a daiva hoser, like I have everything that I need and more than what I need. So I'm just fully suffused with all good. So that's called osher because it comes from the language of osher with an ayin, of wealth, of feeling like enriched. Now that's true in terms of the shoresh, the root, aleph shin resh. But what other shoreshim are in there? Well, there are others. We have osher with an aleph and yashar. also are related roots because they share two letters in common. Because of that, we know that Osher is related to Yashrut, which means straightness, to have the straight path in front of you. And that goes to the next root, Ashurenu. Ashur, or Tashuru, is from the language also of vision, to have vision. And you can see how that relates because we're talking about having vision. It means a straight horizon ahead of you that gives you clarity. So that's the straightness also related to the straightness of the path. It's also related to the vision you can have along that plane. And of course, being able to have such vision. Liyishrei lev uliyishrei lev simcha. Straightness, or and that's really the content of this chapter. The feeling of joy that comes from not carrying around a burden of twistedness inside of us. So we'll see how all of these roots of Osher, Ashri, relate to each other. When Rabbi Nachman tells us Ki Ashri hu lashon re'iyah v'histaklut, he's not going for the original root, that pshat root, the first root that comes to mind when we think about this word Ashrei, fortunate or happy is the man or happy is the one. He's not going for that most clear root that comes to mind. He's already jumping to the second or third level root, which is we're talking about vision. How do we know that the root has to do with vision? We have several examples throughout Tanakh. I mean, how do you know what any word means? You have to understand that the Torah didn't come down from heaven with a dictionary. We have the original dictionary, or the first kinds of dictionaries that we ever had for the Jewish people, were nothing more than what we would call a concordatia. The way that we know what any root means, or what any word means, it's by having a full knowledge, based, and not only of the text of the Torah Shebechtav, of the written text, but also of the oral interpretation of it, of every time any variation on this root appears in all of Tanakh. That's why, in order to be able to have like the fullness of a lexicon in Hebrew, you have to really, really know all of the sources in Tanakh and all of the commentaries in Tanakh that give you insight based on the Torah as it was received, meaning written and also oral, in order to really be able to understand what these words mean. And so when we want to know what a word means, you shouldn't think, oh, this is the real meaning, and then there's some secondary meaning that's less important. Quite the contrary. The fullness of the meaning of a word or a root in Hebrew is only revealed to us through the multifaceted ways in which it's used in all of its contexts all throughout Tanakh. Is everybody following me? This is kind of like a technical point, but it's very important in terms of understanding Torah text and what's really going on. You know, that's how the dictionary is built. So like our first level is what's called like a concordatia. We used to use in the old days the Ben Shoshan, if anybody's familiar, a big, huge tome which brought every single root in every single possible variant and every place that it appeared in Tanakh. In the old days, before we had computers, I used to use my concordatio all the time. Nowadays, yes, I mentioned the Kutei Moharan 205, and that's where we are right now. Not talking about Ashrei, Tehillim number 1, no, not in context of Tikkun HaKlali. Our Tehillim number 32 is an Ashrei form of Tehillim. Let's see. Ki Ashrei l'shon re'iyah v'istaklut, hefech haklipa hanal. Now, we spoke about the fact from the first lesson that Tikkun HaKlali being a remedy specifically for sexual impurity, because that's really what Rabbi Nachman first spoke about, when he first spoke about it. And we talked about the idea that Ta'ava yivakesh nifrad, that desire pursues the person who feels alone or disassociated from Hashem. And so all of these feelings of isolation or alienation or spiritual disconnection are all related to the manifestation of that loneliness or that disassociation, which in many cases turns out to be sexual impurity. So when he talks about the klipa hanal, he's talking about the klipa of negative sexual expression. So when he wants to tell us that re'iyan histaklut, ashrei, is the inversion of that, or it's the healing or upending or nullification of that klipa, that negative spiritual force. Shikar kocha mikikul hareut. Now, what does he say? He says that the truth is that when people get themselves into trouble, in terms of their personal purity, it mainly stems from their re'ut, from how they're using their eyes. For anybody who's familiar with Breslov or Hasidim as Hasidim, so the pathway in Breslov was to be very, very careful. Rabbi Nachman was very clear about how important it is to control, I call it control the input. Make sure that you're not sending your eyes to places that you should not go. It's not true only for men. It's true for all of us because our eyes are wide open windows. All of that data and all of those images that pass in front of them enter into our minds and enter and affect our nefesh. And so they are very big open apertures, right? Literally open, but they are spiritually very vulnerable apertures. They need a lot of protection. And we know that the Torah itself is very clear. We say it in Shema every day, more than once a day, how necessary it is for us to be careful about our eyes. מבחינת ותכהנה עיניו נראות, בחינת yi מאורות חסר. Now here he's brought two different psukim, he's brought two different verses to describe. And when it says ותכהנה עיניו נראות, this is talking about Yitzchak, that his eyes were no longer able to see. Now if anybody's familiar with the Rashi there, what does it say? That it was ani chashuv k'meit, that summa chashuv k'meit, that someone who can no longer see is like a person in a way. It's as if he's dead, not because we would say, oh, his life isn't worth living. Quite the contrary, but because his so much of his yetzer, so much of the yetzer hara is rooted in how we use the eyes or misuse the eyes, that a person who can no longer see is already considered to be in a certain way sort of out of this world. B'chinot, as it says, yi ma'orot chaser. Now, when Rabbi Nachman makes this reference, he's talking about the creation of the sun and the moon. It's a pasuk in Breshit. The fourth day is the day of the creation of the sun and the moon. And when it's written, it says at first that God created a ma'or gadol, ma'or katon, a large illuminating body and a smaller illuminating body. And that's a reference to sun and moon. Now, afterwards, we know, for those who are familiar, I can't assume anybody knows anything, but I can't also spend an inordinate amount of time explaining things that are fairly well known. And so if anybody's unfamiliar with the Rashi and the Medrash, which is also a Gemara, over there about what happened to the sun and the moon and why they are no longer in the same size, because the Torah originally says that God said to create Shnei Ma'orot HaGdolim, two large luminaries, and then later on it says Et HaMa'or HaGadol ve'et HaMa'or HaKaton, the large one and the small one. So we see that first they were the same, then they were different, one large and one small. This is a very, very famous midrash, or Agadah, because it appears both in the midrash and also in the Talmud. But in any case, we understand that something wrong happened, and it's called Pagam Halevana, that the moon got diminished. I'm not going to give a whole shiur on the diminishment of the moon because we have too much to do. But when he talks here about Yimorot Chaser, so he's bringing a Kabbalistic source to understand that the Ma'orot are also a reference, it says in the Tikkun Zohar, to your two luminary bodies, which are your sun and moon, which are called your right eye and your left eye. And they are written, the second time that they appear in the Torah, they are written what's called Chaser. That means, if anyone's familiar with the way the Hebrew works, they should have been written, when we want to write the word Ma'orot full out, it should have a Vav in it. Ma'orot should be fully articulated with a Vav, which gives us that extra O sound. Nevertheless, it's written Chaser in the Torah, and that means that this word can be read, because the Torah doesn't include vowel points, it can also be read as Me'erot, plagues, or affliction. So we understand that in the transition from two perfect large luminaries to one large and one small, there a transition or a change came into the world where the luminary bodies became vulnerable to damage. Now, when the Tikkun Zohar, Dashur Avatenu Zichronam Levracha, now we're talking about Tikkun Zohar, so this is a mystical source. Galilit. Now we're talking about this bad klipa. Like we said before, that's the code word for talking about the negative spiritual energy that brings about sexual impurity. So we say it's rooted in the vulnerability to impurity or seeing inappropriate things that is now within the eyes. Nimsa, sheikar kocham b'kilkul ha're'iyah. we see that how much what he calls lil, that means to say this negative spiritual force, how much strength and how much power it draws from the vision being corrupted. Ashrei, shulishon ri'iyah, hefech mimena. So in our verse, in our chapter 32, we are clearly talking about the inversion of this negative force. It means to say that it is, we get free from it. V'chein maskil, and so too, when we start off this chapter, it says maskil, ki hi b'chinat mishakel, maskil hu hefech mizeh. Mishakel, in Hebrew, you see it's the same word. Maskil means to give intelligence or to enlighten somebody. And so this kind of chapter, this chapter of Ashrei, starts off L'David Maskil. Maskil, L'David Maskil, those two words. This is not a psalm. It doesn't say L'David Mizmor. It's a L'David Maskil. We have in Pesachim, in the Gemara in Pesachim, there's a whole long list of all of the chapters in Tehillim that are called Maskil and what their significance is. And the Gemara tells us that these were special chapters. These chapters were so deep that they were supposed to be told over in public always with a maskil, not a menatzeach, not a conductor who was conducting the orchestra, but instructions to the maskil. The maskil is what we call the meturgeman, the person who sits on the side and makes clear the meaning of the verses so that the rest of the people who are in the audience are able to truly understand what the verses are saying. So we have the role of the meturgeman is like if one of the great sages gave a class and it needed to be explained or translated even. Meturgeman can mean to just plainly translate the words into a language that other people can understand more clearly. So the job of the meturgeman is to take a concept that's a really difficult concept, make it understandable to most people. Now the maskil has the same role. We know that there are chapters of Tehillim where David embedded his process of teshuvah or his process of deep thought so powerfully and also so carefully that he gave these Tehillim over with instructions at the beginning. It's like sort of like kids, don't do this on your own. You need a maskil. You need somebody else to kind of walk you through it to make sure that you understand it properly. Maskil hu hefech mizeh. Now the word maskil, you can see here, has the same letters as the word mishakel. Mishakel in Hebrew, unfortunately, is a very horrible word. It means to lose children. L'shakel banim means to lose children. Ushkulaim, that's also from Shir HaShirim, where many examples. I'm not going to bring all of the whole concordatia so that you'll know all of the usages. Trust me. So l'shakel means, like it says in the Torah, about Rachel. She says, why should I lose two children in one day? And she sends Yaakov away. So the same word, the same root, l'shakel. So mishakel. Now we see it means to have a loss of the generative capacity. And here we say, Rabbi Nachman says, look, the maskil is the inversion of that. It means to say it takes this potential of falling away from one's productive capacity, goes back to the same idea of this klipa. And he says, no, with the maskil we turn that over. Inyan ze ayen makom acher. This he describes and speaks about in some other way. And here he's talking about the Targum and the Meturgeman. I'm not going to get into that because I want to go into the language of the chapter itself since we don't have so much time. Actually, I kind of have to tell you this because it's really too good to leave out. The next piece he brings out, he says, Ki ikar kocha lachti et ha'adam b'mikra chas v'sholem l'yidei lashon Targum shu b'chinat maskil al yidei Turgeman shu morav tov ra. I just told you that the maskil chapter is one where it was necessary to have a meturgeman, someone there to explain it. Well, the problem with anything that is in need of explanation from some other source, it means that it's possible, because it can be understood in one of two ways, it could just as much as it needs to be understood, it's also prone to being misunderstood. That's what it's called Mo'orav Tovera, also because the language of translation is Me'orav Tovera. Meturgeman means, really for our purposes, it means to have it translated into Aramaic so that most people can understand it, because most people spoke Aramaic in the old days. Aramaic is a non-Jewish tongue, and because of that, we assume that it is on the spiritual plane. It's not Lashon HaKodesh. It's not purely pure. It is Ma'urav, Tovara. It's an admixture of good and evil. When you use it for something good, it's good. Is English a good language or a bad language? Is it a holy language or an unholy language? English depends on what you're using it for. We don't call Lashon HaKodesh, sometimes it's Kodesh and sometimes it's not. Lashon Kodesh is Lashon Kodesh. Hebrew has a certain status as a holy tongue. But when it comes to all other languages, sometimes it's good if you're using it for good things. Sometimes it's not. And so we see that also this dual side um, of, of the energy that needs to be made good through Ashrei, that needs to be made enlightening through Maskil, has its dark side to it. Okay, so now we stop. Then he's going to talk about Hallelujah. Okay, let's go to our verses. You've been patient. Okay, how do we know which chapter is which? Ashrei, the one that expresses the spiritual song of Ashrei, is Ashrei Nesui Pesha Kisui Chata. That's chapter 32. Now, let's look at the verses themselves. I'm not going to, because we always have limited time, I'm going to translate it as I go and only really focus on, try to focus on, mainly the ideas from Reb Nosson that are most relevant to us or other Breslov sources. And let me take a drink. 1 second. And good for you for hanging in there. That was a pretty technical discussion. Okay. Okay. The David Maskil. To David, a maskil. We already spoke about this. It means to say it is a maskil. It's one of these, we have a whole list of chapters in Tehillim that start off with maskil, which means that they embody and encapsulate within them deep lessons that are necessary for having an enlightened view, which David HaMelech arrived at through deep contemplation. And because of that, they are particularly worthy of careful study, and usually needed to be accompanied by a meturgiman. That means to say someone on the spot when they were sung, to have somebody right away be there, somebody with intelligence, with discretion and discernment, who is going to be able to offer interpretation on the spot. Ashrei Nesui Pesha Kisui Chata'a. Fortunate, now we said Ashrei relates to vision, being joyous and being straight, and the joyousness that comes from having a vision by having the straight path clear in front of you. So joyous, happy, fortunate is the one who is Nesui Pesha. Now Nesui Pesha, Ashrei can also mean the person's going forward, but okay. So Nesui Pesha Kisui Chata'a. Now Nesui Pesha means that Pesha, which is the worst of all gradations of sin. When we talk about sin, we have Chet and Avon and Pesha. Chet in Hebrew means to have made a mistake. Avon in Hebrew means to have purposefully done a sin, but not rebelliously. That means to say, to have followed one's lower inclination, but not as an act of rebelliousness against God. And Pesha expresses the concept of merit, of actually rebelling against God. Now, Ashrei Nesui Pesha. Nesui Pesha means the person has had their, you can read it in two ways. Either the person has been lifted above the Pesha, or the Pesha has been lifted off them. It can be read either way, and they're both equally compelling readings. And we can understand what the difference is between the two of them. Nesui Pesha means the person has done such a deep teshuva that the Pesha, even the deepest, darkest things that they've done, have already been lifted entirely away from them. In addition, if that's the case, if they've done such a deep teshuva, then Nesui Pesha, they're now kind of like floating above Pesha. That means to say they're no longer subject to falling into the same error because they've done an actual deep, genuine teshuva at the most deep level. Kisui Chata'a. Now, Kisui Chata'a also can be read in two different ways. Kisui Chata'a, you made a mistake. We said a chet is in the language of making a hataya and going astray, right? Lahatot means to go off track. So we say, okay, the person made a mistake. If I made a mistake, So HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be merciful with me and just cover it up. It means to say, I'm not going to pay attention to it. That's called kisui chata'ah. At the same time, kisui chata'ah means you have a kisui, like a protective level upon you from chata'ah. You see how this also can be read in two different ways. And we see how the two go together. The person who has done teshuvah so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will overlook his chait. This is already something that's more minor, and so to overlook it, perhaps it's possible, because he's done his teshuvah, so it's sort of like, oh, that's nothing. And once a person has already achieved that level of teshuvah, he has a certain degree of protection. So we see that there's the idea of the Nesui, someone who can transcend, who's now uplifted above Pesha, because he has done enough teshuvah to have it removed from him. And we have the Kasui Chata'ah, he's protected from future chait because he's already done enough teshuvah for it to be covered over. Ashrei Adam. Oh, I wanted to tell you something. My teacher, this is not a from a Breslov source, but actually Rabbi Nachman does speak about this. My teacher, my Rebbe Tanaspan, she used to say, Tatot alamol gizot. My father used to say, actually she didn't say that, she said Papa. So Papa alamol gizot. That when I forget, he remembers. When I remember, he forgets. So I always took that as a very, like deep instruction, right? When I forget, he remembers. But when I remember, he forgets. Now, what does it mean? We speak about this in the word of Chassidut because she was not speaking from a place of Chassidut, but Judaism is Judaism, Torah is Torah. So in Rabbi Nachman's language, or in the language of Chassidut, we say, "Kashiyesh din limata, ein din limala." When a person judges himself down here, and I take accounting, and I am the person who is making a cheshbon, the account of my chata'im and my avonot and my psha'im, and I don't try and whitewash them, and I'm not trying to get rid of them, I'm confronting them and dealing with them. So that's called me remembering. When I forget, if I just kind of like am blasé about it, he remembers, they stay on the account. But when I remember, when I confront them and I deal with them, he forgets. Kishiyesh din limata, when I'm down here acting as God's agent to judge myself, I'm not talking about judgment. We have all this negative associations with judgment and judging yourself, but really talking about making a reckoning. This is part of the teshuvah practice. So if I am confronting myself and I'm dealing with my stuff, then it doesn't have to be dealt with on high, and I don't have to be awakened through all kinds of unpleasant means because I'm already in the process of doing my reckoning. Ashrei Adam lo yachshov Hashem lo avon. See how now we have the word avon. All of our three categories of sin are all dealt with here or addressed. Fortunate, happy, right, or forward moving, or with vision is the person. Lo yachshov Hashem lo avon, in whom God does not consider that there is any sin. In this case, we said the avon means doing a sin purposefully but not malevolently. Right? I guess that's the difference between the two of them. The person meant to do it, it's called mezid, but he didn't mean to do it in merit. He's not out to be what we call lahachi. He's not out to prove to God how rebellious he is. He's just stuck, and so he makes bad choices. But that's called an avon. Ashrei Adam lo yachshav Hashem lo avon. Well, what does it mean that Hashem doesn't consider that a person has a sin on his account? I mean, obviously everybody makes mistakes. And everybody does things, let's call it, instead of the mistake, because that's the chait, we'll call it the avon, makes the bad choice consciously and willingly. All of us have stuff like that on our account. So who is this person, this, like a theoretical person that Hashem doesn't consider to have any iniquity on his account? Or we say because the person has already done the process of facing and confronting and cleaning a house. And because of that, there's nothing left to consider anymore. Ve'ein b'rucho remiyah. And there is no guile. Remiyah means deceitfulness in the person's spirit. What does that mean? Well, ruach is a very interesting word. Ruach is usually associated with our emotive capacity. So it means the person is not capitalizing on his emotive capacities in order to fool himself. So we say the person has to be honest, completely honest, and be willing to search himself out and be fearless in this process. And such a person can come to the place where God looks at him, looks at her, and says, oh, I don't see you anymore as if you're carrying around all this weight and the great burden of all of your past, because I can see that doing what you're supposed to do. And so I don't see you as a sinner. I see you as an honest person who is not caught up in self-deception. Isn't that great? Halavai, halavai. Ki hecharashti balu atamai. But Nassim has what to say about this one, so we're going to look inside. Let's look at the next. He addresses several psukim all together. Let's see. Let's go through them, and then we'll head back to Reb Nassim. Ki hecharashti balu atamai. When I kept silence, balu atamai, my bones got worn away. B'sha'agati kol hayom. If with my groaning or my cries all day long. So what is this hechirashti, and that wears us out, that makes us moan and groan and cry all day? Well, if you're mechrish, right, if you're being silent, then what are you moaning and groaning about, right? So we have here two different ideas that are kind of put together. The wearing away of the bones. Atamai in Hebrew means bones, but it also is a reference to one's essence. When we say a person's smooth, it doesn't mean their bones, it means their self. You say ke'echarashti. Now the key, you see how this is relating, the key is up here, a continuation of what we saw before. The person who does an honest house cleaning and teshuvah, he's praised that he has not self-deception, he's not deceiving himself. But here we have the word ki, that links us back. Ki hecharashti means when. Ki can mean because, but it also means when. When I kept silent, that means to say, when I avoided doing this process of teshuvah, balu atzamai, I was not confronting my sins, I was not doing my house cleaning, and I felt myself, self with a capital S, I guess, we're being worn away. I felt myself being worn down. B'sha'agati kol hayom. And the sha'agah that's being mentioned here is, we'll call it kind of a non-productive moaning and groaning, rather than a ta'akat tefillah. It's not really crying out to God of prayer. It's just like I'm suffering from carrying around this big burden of my sins because I'm not opening up and speaking about them clearly. That's called the hecharashti, balu atamai. I suffered from silence, from not opening up and speaking about what I had on my conscience. What made me moan and groan? Well, aside from my own personal pain that I was in, I had something heavy upon me. Now, how we call the hands of Hashem, Yomam Balayla, day and night, Tichbad alayadecha, your hand was heavy upon me. I'm talking now to Hashem. Your hand was heavy upon me. What does it mean? Your hand was heavy upon me. It can either be the weight of conscience, or it means it means that you brought, remember I said before, when a person judges himself, he doesn't have judgment upon him from on high. But if he doesn't judge himself, and he's not willing to undertake this process, he can assume that he's going to be feeling the heavy hand upon him. And that's just what happens. That's what David HaMelech is describing. When I was still in a state that I did not want to confront my wrong, I did not want to confront my shortcomings, I suffered from it. I suffered from my own conscience. I suffered from Yisurim. I suffered from the weight of a burden that I didn't know how to relieve myself of. Kiyumam v'layla tichbad alayadecha, nepach l'shadi b'chavonekayit sela. My marrow, the shadi means my marrow in my bones, it like got dried out and transformed like it is in chavonekayit, in the heat of the summer where everything becomes destroyed and withered. So we can see again this idea of the bones, balu atamai, this withering of the bones, which we said doesn't really mean bones themselves. We're talking about the self. So he says it's like I got all dried out. I was withered. I was suffering, or I felt desiccated from the weight upon me, either of the Yisurim, the troubles that you brought upon me to wake me up, or just the heavy weight of my conscience made me feel like I was devastated. That's what we would really call it. Chatati odiacha. Now we get to the point. David HaMelech said that's just two psukim, right? Where he confesses. It's a confession. I was in denial, and I didn't want to have to confront my wrongs that I had done, and I suffered because of it. So afterwards, and I love how when David HaMelech admits to something, he doesn't like belabor it. He usually tells us, this is what I did, this is how bad it was for me, and then I learned from my mistakes and I moved on. So in the whole chapter, we really have those two psukim is where we find that David Melech fesses up to the thing that he had done wrong. And again, it doesn't have to do with what he actually did wrong. Meaning, we're not hearing here the confession of an actual sin. What we're hearing is the confession of avoiding doing teshuvah. That's one of the reasons why it's called a maskil. That's what the Sasofrim said. That's one of the reasons why it's called a maskil, because it needs to be kind of unpacked for us to realize he's not telling us what he did wrong. He's talking about something deeper, which is the way we suffer when we are avoiding dealing with our own stuff. Here, chatati odiacha vavoni lo chisiti. But finally, chatati odiacha, I did reveal my sins to you. And again, you see this word chatati means even down to the chet. Obviously, that's the least. That's the least severe. I made them known to you. That's interesting. As if they weren't known to God before. He mentioned them. Of course they're known to God, but it doesn't make a difference because chatati odiacha, the process of teshuvah isn't about letting God know something that he doesn't already know. Of course he already knows it. The process of confession is to stand before God and make it known to ourselves that he knows. That's called confession, like Ignatius said. Vavoni lo chisiti, and I did not cover up my avon. You see now? Second level. After having admitted to the chata'im, which is easier for me to start off my confession process or my tshuva process, because those are the things I didn't really mean to do. Those are the errors that I fell into unwittingly. So it's easier to start with the chet. Those I let you know first. Avoni lo chisiti. I didn't try to cover up my avon. And you see how sophisticated that is. It's very astute. David HaMelech is telling us when it comes to the avon, our natural inclination is to cover up our culpability. It means to sort of say, oh, I didn't mean to, or it wasn't really volitional, or I couldn't help it. And David HaMelech is saying, no, avoni lo chisiti. When it came time for me to address the level of avon, I did not pretend that it was not an avon. I didn't say, oh, it was a mistake. I didn't say I did it. Oh, thank you so much. I didn't say, not only did I not that I not only claim, I did not claim not to have done it, I also did not claim that it wasn't volitional at the time. Lo chisiti. Amarti. Odeh alei psha'ai l'Hashem. Now we get to the level of pesha. And this is really the hard part, because it now gets to the root of sometimes I might have done things that I did lahachis, that I did them because I was angry at God, or because I was resisting God, or because I had, let's say, like a grudge to bear, so to speak. And so that's already Amarti. I said to myself, I'm even going to go the extra length, and I'm going to tell over and admit to, I'm going to confess and admit to Psha'ai, even the things that I did not only willingly, but also rebelliously to Hashem. Vata and Hashem, I gave it all over to you, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever you want to call it, the stuff that's fairly excusable, the stuff that's a little bit harder to accept, and then the things that are, we would say, are they even forgivable? And what did you do, Hashem? Nasata avon chatati sela. You, again, back to the beginning of back from our first verse, remember? Ashrei nitsui pesha. Atanasata avon chatati. You bore away, right? This is the nasata, means it's like you just carried them off and made them as nothing. Avon chatati, which the avon chatati is kind of combining together, but it means to say that in every chet, in every inadvertent sin, is also some element of avon. And that's a very deep idea, because it means that even when we do something unwittingly or not purposefully, there is some shred there of volitional responsibility, because a chet is not what a shogeg, what we would call in technical terms a shogeg, is not the same as mitzasek. It's not the same as doing something completely unwittingly. There's an element of negligence there, and even over that we have some culpability, and it has a lot of relevance to Hilchot Shabbat and other things. And if we lived in a world where we brought offerings, so we would see what kind of fine lines are in there about how the offering that's brought for a shogeg, what elements of the offering are to remind us that there's also some culpability there about what was volitional in it. So here it's very, in two little words, three little words, Ata nasata avon chatati. David Melech is letting us know, and also putting words in our mouth, that we should be aware that even where we make a glitch, like a little, it seems like it's not really such an important thing because it wasn't really out and out willing. It wasn't fully bemazed. Nevertheless, there is some volitional aspect in there that also requires teshuva. Al zot yitpalel kol chassid elecha la'et mitzvah. Over this, and we don't know what is the this. Over this, and really it means to fall into inadvertent sin. Al zot yitpalel kol chassid elecha la'et mitzvah. Every righteous person, a chassid means someone who's pious. Doesn't really mean righteous. A chassid is someone who wants to do good. He's not always good. He wants to do good. So we say the chassid should be praying about this. Something says all the time, la'it mitzvah, because you never know when something is going to happen that you haven't fully prepared for. How are you supposed to cover all your bases? I was having a discussion with a couple today, and related to Shalom Bayis, but one of the issues that's coming up for them has to do with insurance. So, insurance tells you a lot, like people's attitudes about their medical insurance and their travel insurance and insurance in general. Insurance is about bitachon. So you're supposed to do ishtatut. You should do something that's going to be cover your bases, and so to speak. But the whole idea of insurance is really, like the person is inclined to try to cover every base. And then some people will say, and when it comes to something like insurance, it's sort of like, well, you can't plan for every contingency. In terms of I don't know about physical insurance, but in terms of spiritual insurance, David Melech is telling us that the spiritual insurance that one must invest, if you want to be a chassid, and he doesn't mean a chassid with a shtreimel, he means a chassid to be someone who is mitchased with the borei, mitchased with the briot, a person who is always inclined towards the side of loving kindness and wants to do good in the world, wants to be good, right? So we say a person wants to carry out the goodwill of Hashem, wants to be good to other people, wants to be good and bear the banner of goodness in the world. So such a person must take steps to cover their bases. But the problem is, just like with insurance policies, can you cover for every contingency? Who can go through life like that? You cannot really cover for every contingency. And spiritually, how are you supposed to do it also? You walk out of the house and you're out in the big world. You don't know what you'll encounter. You don't know who you'll encounter. You don't know what you're going to come up against. This is Hashem's world. He does whatever he wants and puts us in all kinds of unexpected situations. So what are we supposed to do? David HaMelech tells us, Al zot. What's the zot? The anything that can happen. Yitpalel kol chassid elecha la'et mitzvah. At every opportunity, every chassid, anyone who considers himself a chassid, right? It means to say someone who's good and wants to do good. So such a person should be praying all the time to you, la'et mitzvah. Eit mitzvah means when the moment finds him, because you never know what's coming. Rak l'sheitef mayim rabim elav lo yagiu. Now it's got two ways of saying. We have two ways of reading this pasuk. We can either read it as this is the prayer. Rak l'sheitef mayim rabim elav lo yagiu. May it be your will, Hashem. I'm a good person and I want to do good. Please don't send me a flood. Don't send me the mayim rabim that are going to knock me down, because I don't have control over what I'm going to be facing in any given day. That's a shetif mayim rabim. We see even Rabbi Nachman having referred to the flood, right? The idea of the shetif. You go outside and you don't know what you're going to see. You don't know what you're going to confront. And so how are you supposed to prepare yourself? Well, before you leave the house, you have to beg HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the shetif mayim rabim level yagiu. I want to be a chassid. Please help me not to be faced by things that are overwhelming for me. That is the basic idea of the shetif mayim rabim, the overwhelming flood, the thing that's too much for me. Please don't bring this to me. That's number one. Also, we can say that it's predictive, not descriptive, but it's not prescriptive, but it's descriptive, right? That it's telling us that when a person prepares himself the right way through prayer, when the flood comes, it won't approach him. That means to say he'll be protected. So either it's prescriptive, and the verse is telling us the way that we should pray, or it's telling us what happens when we do pray, so that when we're going out into the world, our bases are covered. We're begging Hashem to help us cover them because we have no way of ensuring ourselves otherwise. And so it's not that you have to read it one as opposed to the other, because really it can be both descriptive and prescriptive at the same time. Here's a pathway in prayer, and here's what happens when you follow it. Atasesele. By the way, you're supposed to pause there. Because your Tehillim, it doesn't mark it here, but when it comes to your written text, I'm looking at a different copy. Yeah. Ataseterli, mitzar titreni. You're supposed to pause here. And when we say pause, there's a couple of places in Tehillim where you're supposed to pause, like as if a word could be inserted in there, and just let it pass. Ataseter, it's because it's not supposed to be read. Ataseterli mitzar. It's ataseterli, pause. Mitzar titreni. Now, what does that mean? Ataseterli. You hide and protect me. Ataseterli. Mitzar titreni. Please surround me and protect me, fortify me from the tsar. You see how it says tsar? That's the one who comes to attack me, my persecutor. Titreni. And you see how you have here tsar and tsar in the root? That's because you make a meitzar, you make a protective surrounding, right, in order to protect from the tsar, from the persecutor. Ranei falet. Ranei falet is a viveni sela. Sorry, whoops. The refugee, the falet is the refugee, will be caused to. I will be able to sing and rejoice, right? Because you have to sovaveni sela, because you have surrounded me. Again, we have this idea of seter and titreni, and to sovaveni, all of this encompassing that a Kadosh Baruch Hu does for us when we pray for protection from our spiritual challenges. But I wanted to do something in Reb Nosson. So here, let's see. We don't have much time left. I have a choice. I know what I'm going to do. Because we started a few minutes late, I'm going to finish out the parak and explain it to you. And then, if we have a few minutes, I can steal a few more minutes at the end in order to be able to do the halachot. Askilcha v'oracha b'derech zutelech. And this is David HaMelech speaking directly to us. Askilcha. Remember, we said this is the idea of the maskil, right? Askilcha. I will enlighten you, or illuminate you, or give you wisdom. V'orcha, and provide you with light and direction. B'derech zutelech, for the path that you should take. Yatsa alecha emi. Yatsa alecha emi. The first two lessons, Rachel, are on the course page. They're already they're archived. Allow my einayim, that means to say my wisdom, to be your instructors. That means to say, David HaMelech says, I've already gone through this process, and I have personal experience in this, so please take my advice. Al tihiyu kisus kiferet ein havin. Do not be like a horse or like a mule, ein havin, that doesn't understand. B'meteg v'resen edio livlom bal krov elecha. Now we have here a few different ways of reading this pasuk. It's not such an easy pasuk to understand. We say, because of their lack of understanding, the animals, the sus and the parrot, right? What's the difference between a sus and a parrot? A horse is fertile, and the parrot is sterile. So we have two impure animals. They are both behemot tmeot. They're not kosher animals. So that already means that they're implying they haven't got much da'at available to them. They're very physical. That's the idea of the behemot tmeah. All animals are physical, but there's a reason why we eat certain species and don't eat others. So we say the sus and the ferret, they represent kind of pure physicality. David HaMelech says you cannot be overwhelmed and overcome all the time by just your base instincts. Don't just go by your impulses. Ein havin, he doesn't understand. If I tell my donkey, if I tell my mule to go in a certain direction, he doesn't necessarily get it. If he sees some tempting, like bit of growth, undergrowth, off the side of the road, even though I have to get from point A to point B, he's going to go make a decision that he wants to go off the road and go nibble. So he's called Ein Havin. I have a purpose. I have a feedback for him. I'm going to feed him well at the end of the line. He doesn't have to go off and eat now. Nevertheless, because he has an impulse, unless I redirect him, he's going to go off the road. Opposite him, he needs always the bit and the bridle in order to contain him. And so we say that's a product of his Ein Havin. Without some kind of forceful direction from outside, he doesn't know where to go. And not only that, Bal Krove Lecha, right? Bal Krove Lecha means so that he won't come close to you, because sometimes the animal feels violent towards you, or sometimes the animal wants you're not letting him take a biss out of the plants that are growing on the side of the road. He might decide he wants to take a biss out of you. He doesn't want to eat you. He wants to punish you. So you put a bit in his mouth and a bridle so you have control over him. David HaMelech says, are we susim? Are we horses and mules that we need forcible constraints from above in order to direct us in the direction that we require, or in order to keep us away from doing the thing we shouldn't do? No. David HaMelech says, Al tiyu kisus kifer denavim. You're not like this. You don't have to be like that. Why are you waiting for the heavy hand? Remember the image that we had before? Tichbad alay yadecha. David HaMelech says, what are you waiting for the heavy hand to weigh upon you and for you to suffer? That's not what you need. You have an ability within yourself to follow the path that you need to take. Remember, that's the idea of ashrei, having a vision and going knowing which path you need to take, being able to take it, and the joy that comes from being on the right road. And now he tells us, when a person is like the sus, he does this a lot, he'll tell us what happens if you don't follow my advice. Rabim machovim l'rasha. A person who is wicked suffers endlessly. He has so much that pains him. We're not here talking about the fact that we would assume that the righteous only experience good things and the wicked suffer. That's not what he means. He means that the person who's not on the right path, where did we say the real pain is here? In this parak, in this chapter, David HaMelech is telling us the good person, the chassid, which every Jew is, the good person suffers inside of himself when he has a load on his conscience. Unless he is straight and in a good relationship with Hashem, he's in pain. He can be in pain even without realizing it. He can be in denial of this pain, but things are not good for him. So when the verse tells us, Rabim machovim l'rasha, the wicked are suffering, he says it with a lot of compassion. It doesn't mean he's wishing suffering upon the wicked. He says it's just the natural state of affairs. Rabotech b'Hashem chesed yisovevenu, the beautiful verse. Rabotech b'Hashem chesed yisovevenu, someone who trusts in God. He is surrounded by loving kindness. This is, of course, a lashon nofel lashon, chesed and chassid. They have a line kind of joining the two of them, that the person who is botech b'Hashem, he is doing chesed, he is the chassid, and so God's loving kindness also surrounds him. And of course, this is also hearkening back to our Seiterli Mitzar Titzreini, this idea of the surrounding protection that's afforded to the person who is attempting to be good and do good in the world. Simchu v'Hashem, rejoice in God. V'gilu tzadikim. How nice is that, right? David HaMelech tells us, just keep yourself in the category of the Botech Hashem. Keep yourself in the category of the Chassid. The Chassid is not a perfect person. He's good and he wants to do good. That's what makes him a Chassid. And immediately we finish off with Simchu v'Hashem, rejoice in God. You're on the right path. Ashrei, remember we said, here's your happiness. So you can like allow yourself, you're liberated from this weight of this burden of sin on you. So rejoice, feel good in it. The Gilu Tzadikim, and David HaMelech even tells us, you're a tzaddik now, right? Here you are, tzaddikim. V'harninu kol yishrei lev. Everyone who's straight of heart. You see how we started off with Ashrei, the straightness of heart, the clean conscience. Harninu. Harninu means to be so joyous that you feel like singing. So, B'ezrat Hashem, we will continue next week. And if I have time, so I'll tell you some more Likutei Halachot that were relevant to this chapter, and we'll move on to the next one, B'ezrat Hashem. And if anybody still wants to be able to watch the film with the English subtitles of The Sixth Beggar, send me an email and I'll be happy to send you the link. Just don't pass it around because it's really private for us, and it's, you know, I don't have rights to it. It's just I'm doing you a favor. Okay, have a good week.